thank you so much once again, Chiara Katrina, joining us from Italy. It's again a possibility and opportunity for RESO platform to have experts from different domain. You are a research fellow and at the same time expert, environmental sociologist and political ecologist, and your expertise lies a lot in terms of research, environmental concerns, and all. Today, we are going to cover a wonderful topic. My first question, which is certainly a very, very important question, says, how has the global agenda impacted pastoralist and smallholder communities in East Africa?
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's a mutual pleasure to actually be here because I really care about these topics, and especially I care about the chance of, let's say, widening a little bit the debate, bringing these kind of topics into different platforms. So for me, the green agenda, especially the global neoliberal green agenda, impacted communities such as pastoralists in Eastern Africa on many levels. The whole bioeconomy paradigm that tends to imagine technocratic and really technology-intensive solutions for the future, for me, it draws on an elitist vision where resources and patents that are going to be more and more necessary to cope with future challenges stay and will stay in the hands of a very small elite. So I think this kind of vision of sustainability is detrimental not only to local communities and indigenous people, but to the working and the middle class all over the world, more specifically for communities in East Africa. For me, the pursuing of extensioning protected areas as envisioned, for example, in the 30x30 frameworks, which expects to extend to 30% of total land and water surfaces under protection by 2030, as it is endorsed by big environmental and big international organizations, may have a detrimental effect on the sovereignty and the well-being of local communities all around the world. They're going to see their land stolen, their human rights, and we're already seeing it. The expansion of protected areas usually disregards and disrespects local communities' human rights, and also it tends to neglect the fact that indigenous people protect their land up to 80% of world's biodiversity. So to me, this kind of approach, technocratic and the economy-based approach to sustainability, whenever they don't problematize class division, power relationships, and how these affect control and access over resources, they are not going to be inclusive, rather egalitarian, and thereof not really sustainable.
About impact pastoralist and smallholder communities in East Africa. Certain things you've also talked about, human rights and comprehensive approach, very important. Would like to move on to my second question. One question says, can you explain what greenwashing looks like in the context of conservation and climate policies in East Africa?
This is exactly connected directly to what I just said. Any green paradigm, or initiative that does not really take into account power relations, hence is not problematized under a political point of view, it reiterates the same detrimental dynamics of the business as usual. If it doesn't dismantle the status quo, it is just greenwashing. This is basically the core of my approach, of what I'm saying, of my vision of what sustainability transitions. This is even more relevant in the context of local communities and indigenous people of East Africa, because they already undergo oppression, and if you want a double oppression, because they live in a global south country which is already exploited and oppressed at the macro global level, because they depend on traditional livelihoods that their own country wants to dismantle because they're pressured towards, so-called growth and modernization. Where I had direct observation of greenwashing impacts on local communities in Tanzania during my PhD research, where I investigated community-based conservation. It was praised as a response to forest conservation. It was criticized for being militarized and violent and a colonial arrangement. But in my observation, also the principle of community-based inspired by bottom-up participation. It is good in general terms, but it being kind of emptied of its political scope. It's now diluted. It's too vague. It's not prescriptive enough. And because of that, community-based conservation in Tanzania, which was supposed to be a green and socially inclusive kind of initiative, today still reiterates exactly the same dynamics of fortress conservation because it lacks transparency. It is underpinned by land grabbing de facto, so communities are going to lose their land even though they are not aware about it, because the local government's officials, are presenting community-based conservation as a part of the project that is going to stay in the community. But truth is that if villagers want to withdraw from these protected areas, they are going to lose their land. So, which will stay in the hands of the government. So this is just one of the examples of how greenwashing, can sneak in and also co-optate more advanced narratives like the community-based one, because community-based work is already going beyond and already is an evolution of a problematic version of conservation, which is fortress conservation, but is still equally problematic. And this regarding my case study, which is Tanzania, let me refer to a piece of hands-on investigation on greenwashing in Eastern Africa, especially a recent report that was released by the Masai International Solidarity Alliance, which I will introduce in a little bit. The authors, they just presented this carbon credit project, which has been developed in the country by Volkswagen, so the automotive corporation. But they're reporting how these projects, they usually deals with, reforestation and tree planting. They're actually lacking prior free and informed consent on behalf of the local community. And so basically the project is interfering with the local land management system. It's interfering with Maasai grazing and mobility needs and practices. So it's actually posing a great concern for local food security, disrespect of lands, and free informed consent rights, and also Indigenous people rights. So this is again another example of how greenwashing can take place, but actually hide, deeper violations on the human and social levels. In this specific regard, Volkswagen is continuously denying any allegations on its involvement in, intervention or overlooking Indigenous people rights. That's why the the Maasai International Solidarity Alliance also demanded a 5-year moratorium on future soil carbon deals projects in pastoralist rangelands in northern Tanzania in order to possibly stop these violations, which are being systematically ignored because, carbon projects, they tend to impose very restrictive grazing models. They disrupt traditional pastoral mobility. They have opaque and weak regulatory protections, leaving basically pastoral community vulnerable to land alienation, and they lose control over their land and their community resources. Additionally, another report by Freedom House was recently released, and because of many episodes that are happening in Tanzania, Tanzania has been classified as a not free country anymore, following, for example, the arrest, detention, and threats to many opposition leaders and activists, especially activists from Maasai community, because they are opposing forced mass eviction that are occurring in Ngorongoro and Loliondo areas because of tourism interest expansions and protected area expansion. They're being massively and violently evicted, and they are opposing that. And when local leaders and local activists out, the government is heavily repressing them. This is also follows a very controversial UNESCO report on Ngorongoro, which identified the local community as the major ecological threat to the ecological integrity of UNESCO. Of Ngorongoro as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and I think this is a very concerning, state of things. Also, I have links for both of the reports that I just cited, and it would be nice for me to share it also.
Lot for briefing us on greenwashing and how it is connected a comprehensive approach like sociological, then humanitarian and ecological concerns, and how you handle the same topic during your PhD thesis. So quite a lot of experience on this particular topic, which I figure out. So would like to move on to my second question. A very important question says, in what ways are local communities excluded from environmental decision making process?
You see, this can be very subtle because if you allow yourself to look closer, you will see that also participatory environmental governance arrangements like community-based conservation, they actually hide. They should have detrimental effects on the community. They hide very negative exclusion kind of disenfranchisement dynamics. So one way, for example, citing these examples is the lack of prior free and fully informed consent before and throughout, the process of environmental projects, whatever kind of projects they are. As the case of Volkswagen shows as well, villagers are often, directly contacted by corporations, by big international environmental conservation organization, government official. They tend to present villagers, with these kind of all-inclusive solutions to their problems, to implement community-based projects that are going to associate biodiversity, conservation, and economic development all together. So these are very promising for them. And then eventually, truth is that often these projects are designed and conceived by external actors who clearly they're going to prioritize their own interests on pastoralist land. So a big international organization will make sure, for example, when it's going to start an environmental conservation program, their own interest is to make sure that they will continue to receive their own funds, from possibly millions-dollar philanthropic foundations. And corporations, they will make sure, as in the case of carbon credit programs, that they don't really have to reduce their own emission where their factories are. So, for example, slowing production or paying extra taxes on their extra emissions, which allows extra profit, but they can just go somewhere else, usually where communities are less empowered and more disenfranchised. They can grab their own land somewhere else, turn them into forests, and sometimes maybe even getting tax reductions for, because they actually supported environmental conservation and land protection. So they eventually force communities out of their land and leave them without a livelihood source. So they can be excluded when the power dynamics are always the same and they stay the same, and we don't dismantle them. If a powerful actor, will come to a community selling their own environmental conservation ideas and initiatives, telling them they are going to benefit from untouched ecosystem rather than from their livelihood source, this is always going to, keep it unbalanced and possibly a source of exclusion for the local community. And what actually pisses me off, like almost on a personal, sentimental level, are two more subtle aspects. One is that usually local communities, they truly deeply welcome these projects because they believe in the biodiversity conservation cause. They want to, they depend on the integrity of ecosystem, and they're deeply embedded, and integrity of ecosystem is a deeply embedded value in their own cultural systems, so they really care about it, and they would do anything for it. And when powerful actors come, they eventually take advantage of it. And another is the layer of the narrative and the question of epistemic justice. And because, local communities, they don't participate in environmental decision making first because their world vision, their knowledge systems, and their livelihood system are excluded from the narrative, from the dominant ideas that we have of environmental governance. So they are alternatively labeled as backward, for example, or too much resource consuming according to what is most comfortable to pursue, the environmental objectives of the initiative of the project, and at the end of the day, they never roll not even on their plan or on their future.
Like, communities being excluded environmental decision making process and how it impacts the overall environmental context, and, our concerns have to be sort of, directed towards making a better environmental possibilities in order to enhance the very capacities of policy implementations. Would like to move on to my fourth question. Very important question says, what are some grassroots efforts or indigenous strategies that truly reflect sustainable practices in the region?
Thank you for the question because it's a key point. Because in my opinion, any livelihood system, any cultural or knowledge system that is alternative to the dominant one, to the mainstream one, is a form of resistance to the ongoing expansion of neoliberal values and neoliberal dynamics, commodification of every single sphere of human and non-human life. So just by existing as an alternative culture, representing an alternative set of values and set of practices, they are resisting the oppressive force of neoliberalism that wants basically every person, every community to be homologated, to be well integrated into the market in every aspect of their lives, and to rely on the market for every need in their lives. So by resisting these dynamics, communities like pastoralist communities or local communities in East Africa, to me, they practice radical sustainability in this sense. So every practice that draws on an alternative cultural knowledge system should be preserved and should be taken as the foundation to imagine a more sustainable future. And in this sense, to me, customary land management systems are the very plastic, physical expression of this. They are based on collective ownership, biograzing practices, or agroecological farming practices. Most importantly, they are radically sustainable at a very community and social level, because these resource management systems, they're underpinned by social bonds that therefore must be nurtured. These communities, they nurture peer-to-peer exchange, peer-to-peer monitoring, for example, on resource exploitation. They nurture collective grassroots mobilization, self-organization to satisfy common needs, especially when there is neglection by institutions. So for me, this is how practically, they embed sustainability. So again, at this regard, a policy brief from the Matai International Solidarity Alliance and CELEP will be released in September, and where we showcase how Eastern Africa pastoralism has actually holds multiple contributions to sustainability, but is also facing key challenges, including violations to their human rights. But in this policy brief, we try to identify steps and measures that European institutions can take on to protect and promote pastoralism as a key sustainable livelihood strategy that has to be fostered for a more sustainable and just future in this area. And also European policies, European institutions can do a lot to affect Eastern African communities with their policies in biodiversity, natural conservation, agriculture, trade, whatever. So a possible international alliance, like the Matai International Alliance, like the CELEB network, can actually, I think, do also a lot. They can have a significant impact on pastoralists and on the respect of their human rights. Also about these documents, I will share a link so you can access it soon when it will be released in September. So MISA is the Maasai International Solidarity Alliance, which is an international alliance of different types of organizations, of practitioners, activists, and researchers who stand in solidarity with of northern Tanzania, whereas CELEB is an informal kind of advocacy network of European organizations of different kinds and different specialists and practitioners who are in partnership with pastoralist organization of Eastern Africa to amplify their advocacy action.
So much for letting us know this, grassroots efforts, indigenous strategies that reflect sustainable practices in the region. Very important. light that you've thrown, and would like to move on to my fifth question. A final question, wrap-up question says, how can policymakers and activists shift from a top-down to a community-centered sustainability model?
As I personally have identified the very roots of participatory governance as the problem, I would say first by reclaiming the meaning of community-based and bottom-up participation. My focus and in my research and my approach is to pose the urgency to repoliticize discourses and narratives around sustainability and participatory from a social and epistemic justice and the colonial perspective, working, for instance, on raising awareness and addressing the negative stereotypes which still affects, for example, pastoralists through reflexive research that has to be public funded, in my opinion, the colonial in its ontology and in its epistemology. So sustainability, just like science and research, they don't materialize in a void. They don't work in a void. They are determined by culture, history, socioeconomic context. Therefore, research policies and initiatives, they should stem from the same vision that our reality, should be politicized. We should take into account, for example, we should take into account power relationships when we want to, set up any kind of initiative or just a research project and aims to dismantle them. In my vision for Indigenous people and local communities of East Africa, customary institutions and local civil society organization represent this. They have the possibility to contribute to policy design and policy implementation and evaluation only if they're actually empowered to do that, not if they keep on being marginalized. Otherwise, their participation will probably be a facade in terms of how. So they should be recognized just by also other stakeholders, in particular governments, whether it's local or national government, and fully and truly involved in decision making. They must be empowered in their capacity, to actually design and implement and evaluate the policy that affects them. And to me, a truly community-centered sustainability model, so a truly bottom-up one, should stem also from an integrated vision of what sustainability has to be for communities in East Africa. This means all-encompassing land rights, so the respect of customary arrangements of traditional land system and tenure systems. Mobility rights, self-determination rights should also be protected in order to actually realize livelihood security and resilience in this community. And ultimately, and of course, last but not least, the inclusion through empowerment of women and youth in order to ultimately ensure such ecological resilience. That, to go back to how we started, if it's not also just and equitable, it's not going to be truly sustainable.
5 important questions, and first was like the global agenda impacting pastoralist and smallholder communities. And you've also explained greenwashing, very important, and then communities excluded environmental decision-making process and some grassroots efforts, indigenous strategies that reflect sustainable practices in the region, and involves policymaker activities, shift from top-down to a community-centered sustainability model. You've talked about a very, very important topic, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining RESO platform. As you're already familiar, RESO is a platform where we try to step through the noise to cause you most relevant and reliable sociological interpretations and narratives in different domains. It may be environmental concerns, human trafficking, human rights, gender-specific topics, or some environmental, something, which has sustainability to offer and to make our society more comprehensive, more better, particularly touching the academia and research domain, in order to make the society more compatible, to make a life more better on this planet. Or that's the reason, that's the very philosophy and methodology of this platform. Once again, ma'am, thank you so much for joining us from Italy. We're very glad to have you.
Thank you so much.